You don't get a second chance at this. Ethan whispered to himself as the horizon flared with the first light of dawn, casting long shadows across the jagged remains of the training grounds. Zyra staggered among the shattered platforms, her armor reflecting the pale light in fractured shards, each movement careful and deliberate. The wind carried a metallic tang, and the hum of distant machinery vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. Ethan moved silently, his boots scuffing against the scorched concrete, eyes scanning for unstable surfaces, for anything that could shift the fragile balance of the terrain. He extended a hand toward Zyra, not with words, but with a motion precise enough to convey safety, a gesture that cut through the tension like a knife through mist. She hesitated, cyan eyes meeting his, calculating, measuring trust in the space of a heartbeat, before allowing herself to step closer, letting his steady presence anchor her. Dust swirled around them, catching in the first rays of sunlight, forming patterns that flickered like phantom memories on the broken walls. Ethan adjusted his grip on the tools strapped to his belt, motioning toward a fallen panel where the two could regain footing, and Zyra followed, her movements still guarded, yet tentative. The air was thick, carrying the faint crackle of distant circuits and the subtle scent of smoldering metal. A sudden gust lifted a tangle of debris, spinning it in an arc, and Ethan's reflex was immediate, shielding Zyra without hesitation, his hand brushing against her arm, grounding her in the present, anchoring both to the reality that survival depended on connection as much as awareness. They crouched behind the panel, breaths mingling with the morning air, each inhalation a mixture of anticipation and quiet calculation. Ethan's eyes traced the shifting light, noting the way it revealed hidden textures, cracks, and safe passages across the fractured ground, offering paths that Zyra would not have seen alone. Her gaze followed him, a silent acknowledgement, and in that small, wordless exchange, the first seed of trust took root, delicate and resilient. The hum of distant engines rose and fell, a rhythm that both disturbed and guided them, punctuated by the occasional clatter of debris settling. Ethan's hand rested lightly on the edge of the panel, signaling readiness without alarm, a reassurance that action could be deliberate even in chaos. Zyra inhaled, feeling the pulse of the terrain, the subtle shifts in light, the language of motion Ethan seemed fluent in, a language that required no words, only presence. She moved closer, adjusting her stance, and he mirrored her shifts, a choreography of awareness that was both protective and preparatory. The ground beneath them seemed to hold its breath, the fractured tiles and twisted rebar forming a mosaic of risk and opportunity. A thin line of sunlight broke through a gap in the overhead structure, casting a stripe across Zyra's armor, and in that flash, she glimpsed the human's intent. Not dominance, not conquest, but a quiet assertion of competence and care. The scene held, poised on the edge of what was possible, an unspoken promise that what came next could change the trajectory of their encounter, a pivot from tension to connection, from isolation to the first fragile step toward understanding. The morning light stretched across the fractured landscape, glinting off Zyra's armor as she cautiously stepped over debris, each movement deliberate and measured. Ethan moved beside her, his presence a steadying force, eyes scanning every surface, every shadow, calculating safe passage. The air was filled with the faint hum of distant machinery, carrying a metallic tang that clung to their senses, reminding them of the fragile balance of the environment. Ethan reached for a displaced panel, tilting it to form a temporary bridge over a gap in the rubble, and Zyra followed, trusting the human guidance without hesitation, her cyan eyes reflecting the pale sunlight. A small wind stirred the dust at their feet, lifting it in swirling patterns that caught the light like tiny prisms, and Ethan adjusted his footing, signaling subtly that the next step was secure. Zyra mirrored his movements, learning the rhythm of caution and awareness, their silent coordination forming an unspoken bond. The distant hum shifted, a soft vibration through the ground, and both of them froze, feeling the pulse of the terrain beneath their boots. Ethan extended a hand toward a pile of twisted metal, steadying it for Zyra as she climbed, the gesture precise and unobtrusive, communicating safety through action alone. She placed a hand on the cool metal, feeling the human intention behind the movement, a connection born of necessity and instinct rather than words. Light shifted through gaps overhead, casting narrow beams that illuminated the textures of the broken concrete, the jagged edges of rebar, and the subtle patterns of soot and ash. Ethan's eyes followed every detail, noting where footing was secure, where the path narrowed, where the next challenge would emerge, and Zyra began to anticipate his movements, her own body adapting to the cues of a human she had only just met. The wind changed again, a soft gust carrying a hint of ozone from damaged circuits, and Ethan adjusted his stance, showing without speaking that the space was safe for a moment, allowing her to regain balance and composure. They paused briefly, side by side, breath slow, measuring the rhythm of the environment, and in that silence, Zyra felt the first stirrings of trust, fragile but real, anchored in the tangible actions of someone who would not abandon her. Debris shifted under the slightest breeze, and Ethan moved to shield her, his motion smooth and assured, not protective in a domineering sense, but in a careful, deliberate way that communicated reliability. Zyra exhaled, sensing the human understanding that action could convey more than words ever could, and she adjusted her stance again, aligning with his subtle rhythm, learning the flow of movement that could navigate the broken world safely. The morning sun continued to rise, casting longer, warmer rays that glinted off surfaces in fleeting flashes, creating a tapestry of light and shadow that guided each careful step. Ethan nodded once, almost imperceptibly, toward a narrow corridor of debris that promised a more stable path, and Zyra followed, the trust between them growing, an invisible tether linking two very different beings, each relying on the other to move forward through the precarious terrain, their coordinated movements forming a quiet, resilient partnership in the heart of a fractured world. The light shifted subtly through the fractured ceiling panels, casting long, angled beams across the uneven floor as Zyra moved cautiously, each step measured against the irregular terrain. Ethan remained close, his presence a steadying influence, guiding her movements with subtle gestures and careful positioning. Dust and faint smoke hung in the air, catching the light in motes that danced around them, and the distant hum of damaged machinery vibrated softly beneath their feet, a reminder of the instability surrounding them. Zyra paused at a widened gap in the floor, glancing at Ethan with a questioning look, and he tilted his head slightly, signaling the safest route, a combination of instinct and precise observation that spoke more than words ever could. She followed, balancing carefully along the narrow ledge, the texture of the metal and concrete under her boots providing silent cues for each shift of weight. Ethan mirrored her pace, adjusting subtly to the tremors beneath their feet, creating an unspoken rhythm between them that blended caution with momentum. Light glinted off Zyra's armor, highlighting the subtle dents and scratches, telling the story of past struggles without need for explanation. Ethan's hand hovered near a loose panel, ready to steady her without intrusive contact, a gesture of partnership that built trust incrementally. The faint scent of smoldering circuits mixed with the earthy tang of disturbed concrete, enveloping them in a sensory landscape that required acute awareness to navigate. A sudden shaft of sunlight illuminated a pile of scattered debris, revealing a hidden path that Ethan noted silently, guiding Zyra through a subtle shift in posture, a nod of the head, and a careful step forward. She adjusted her balance, feeling the human logic at work in his movements, the meticulous attention to angles, weight, and stability, a quiet expertise that offered reassurance. The wind shifted, lifting small particles into a swirling pattern that momentarily obscured the path ahead, and Ethan paused, letting Zyra move first, signaling confidence in her adaptability and decision-making. Her cyan eyes flickered with understanding, acknowledging the rhythm they had developed, an alliance born of observation and shared awareness rather than words. They continued forward, each step a measured negotiation with the environment, sensing the subtle shifts and vibrations that foretold potential hazards. The overhead panels rattled lightly, and a loose fragment shifted, prompting Ethan to adjust his stance, a silent communication of timing and spacing that Zyra followed instinctively. As they reached a slightly more stable area, the two paused, side by side, absorbing the ambient sounds, the light, and the faint tremors beneath their boots. The shared silence was not empty. It was a space filled with mutual acknowledgement, a growing understanding that their combined awareness allowed them to navigate the fractured terrain with efficiency and care. Dust swirled in a soft eddy around them, sunlight catching the particles in a subtle display of movement and reflection. Ethan extended a hand toward a higher platform, indicating the next move, and Zyra followed without hesitation, trusting the unspoken coordination that had been built between them, a partnership emerging. Quietly, resiliently, in the midst of instability and uncertainty, each aware of the other's presence and intent. The narrow corridor opened into a wider chamber bathed in soft, filtered light, dust motes dancing lazily in the air as Zyra stepped cautiously, her cyan eyes scanning every surface for hidden instability. Ethan moved just behind her, his careful attention to detail guiding each of her steps without a word. The faint hum of distant machinery mixed with the occasional creak of shifting metal, creating a rhythm that both warned and guided them. A series of broken panels formed a makeshift bridge across a shallow gap, and Ethan held one steady, his hand pressing gently against the cold metal while Zyra balanced carefully, feeling the reassurance in his steady grip. The smell of ozone from damaged circuits lingered, blending with the earthy tang of the concrete floor, each inhalation sharpening their awareness. Light flickered through overhead slats, casting long, angular shadows that revealed subtle hazards in the uneven ground, and Ethan subtly shifted his stance to indicate the safest path, a silent choreography of trust and observation. Zyra mirrored his movements, aligning with his rhythm, each step a quiet negotiation with the terrain that demanded focus and precision. A faint breeze lifted small particles into the air, catching the light in fleeting glimmers, and Ethan adjusted the makeshift bridge to provide additional stability, his gestures calm but deliberate, encouraging Zyra to advance with confidence. The space around them seemed to pulse with subtle energy, a combination of wind, light, and the lingering vibrations of distant machinery, and both moved in harmony with that rhythm, each sensing the other's intent without the need for speech. Zyra's breathing synchronized with Ethan's, a subtle bond forming as they navigated the chamber, each aware of the fragility beneath their boots and the shared responsibility to move forward safely. She reached the far side of the makeshift bridge and paused, looking back at Ethan with a hint of acknowledgement, a silent recognition of the trust that had been built in a short span. He gave a small nod, indicating readiness to continue, and they proceeded together, stepping carefully over scattered debris and uneven surfaces, their movements precise, deliberate, and in tune with one another. The chamber opened slightly toward a brighter area, sunlight streaming in from a distant opening, highlighting the textures of the walls and floor, the jagged edges of displaced metal, and the subtle interplay of shadows that created natural guides for navigation. Ethan's eyes tracked every detail, signaling through posture and minimal gestures where it was safest to place weight, and Zyra followed, her cyan eyes reflecting not just light, but understanding, an intuitive grasp of human reasoning combined with her own observational skill. Dust swirled in gentle eddies around them as they advanced, the air thick with anticipation, yet their coordinated movements made the chamber feel less threatening, the tension gradually replaced by cautious confidence. Every step, every adjustment, every silent communication reinforced the bond between them, a developing partnership rooted in awareness, trust, and the quiet acknowledgement that moving together was their safest path forward in a world of uncertainty. The chamber opened into a larger space bathed in soft, diffused sunlight that filtered through high slits, casting narrow beams across uneven surfaces. Zyra stepped carefully, her cyan eyes scanning the floor for subtle shifts in debris, while Ethan followed closely, his movements deliberate, creating a rhythm of mutual awareness. The air carried a faint metallic tang, mingling with dust stirred by their footsteps, and the soft hum of distant machinery provided a constant, low vibration beneath their boots. Ethan adjusted a loose panel, creating a small ramp over a narrow crevice, and Zyra placed her foot cautiously on it, feeling the subtle give of the metal, trusting the human guidance. Their breaths echoed softly in the space, measured and synchronized, forming an unspoken cadence as they advanced. Light reflected off surfaces at odd angles, revealing textures, edges, and slight inclines that could shift unexpectedly, and Ethan's subtle gestures directed Zyra around these hazards without a single word spoken. She followed, learning his cues, the slight tilt of a hand or the subtle shift in posture signaling the safest path forward. The wind inside the chamber stirred, lifting motes of dust that caught the light in fleeting glimmers, and Ethan paused briefly, allowing Zyra to observe and adjust to the space herself, reinforcing trust through shared attention. The faint sound of shifting metal echoed as a distant door or panel shifted slightly, prompting both to move with renewed caution, each step deliberate and precise. Zyra felt the human logic behind each action, the meticulous care in observing angles, surfaces, and potential instabilities, and her confidence in his guidance grew. Sunlight illuminated a higher ledge, revealing a slightly more stable area, and Ethan subtly indicated the path upward, his motion smooth and assured. Zyra adjusted her stance, rising slowly, guided by his presence and the silent communication of careful observation. The chamber walls showed traces of past disturbances, jagged edges, and scattered debris, yet the light highlighted potential safe passages, and both moved in harmony with the subtle cues of the environment. Dust swirled in soft eddies around their feet as they progressed, the rhythm of their steps and breathing blending with the ambient sounds, creating a quiet partnership anchored in shared awareness. Each small adjustment, each unspoken cue reinforced a connection built on trust, observation, and mutual reliance. As they reached the far end of the chamber, a faint glow hinted at the next space beyond, and both paused briefly, sensing the shift in light, the change in textures underfoot, and the promise of slightly more stable ground ahead. The air remained thick with anticipation and the faint hum of distant machinery, yet the synchronized movements of human and alien conveyed confidence, awareness, and a growing bond forged in the careful navigation of an unpredictable environment, each relying on the other in a quiet, steady partnership. The narrow path opened into a softly lit chamber, the beams of sunlight shifting across uneven surfaces, revealing subtle textures and shadows that guided careful movement. Zyra moved cautiously, each step deliberate, feeling the slight give of the floor beneath her boots, while Ethan adjusted his stance beside her, watching for shifts and loose debris with precise attention. The air carried the faint tang of metal and dust, stirred by their passage and mingling with the soft hum of distant machinery that pulsed gently underfoot. Ethan extended a hand toward a small incline, a silent invitation for Zyra to move forward with confidence, and she placed her foot carefully, trusting the gesture, her cyan eyes absorbing every detail of the terrain. Dust motes lifted in the beams of sunlight, catching in midair like tiny prisms, and the subtle movement of air around them created a rhythm that both followed intuitively, each step and adjustment a conversation without words. Ethan shifted a panel slightly, forming a more stable path across a fractured section, and Zyra moved along it, guided by the human logic behind each adjustment, feeling the assurance in his deliberate actions. The chamber carried a quiet resonance as small pieces of debris settled, echoing softly, and the two moved in synchrony, aware of the faintest vibrations in the ground that signaled potential instability. Light filtered through overhead gaps, illuminating patterns on the floor that suggested the safest routes, and Ethan's subtle nods and shifts of weight guided Zyra without verbal direction, reinforcing the trust that had been building between them. A gentle gust stirred particles of dust into swirling eddies, and Ethan paused momentarily, allowing Zyra to take the lead, demonstrating confidence in her judgment and strengthening the unspoken connection. Her breathing aligned with the subtle rhythm of movement, a quiet acknowledgement that she understood his signals and could respond in turn. The air seemed to pulse with anticipation as they approached a slightly elevated platform, and Ethan indicated a way forward with a careful tilt of his hand, guiding her over uneven surfaces with precision. Zyra adjusted her stance, following his lead, her steps deliberate and measured, the two forming a coordinated partnership that relied on observation, awareness, and shared trust rather than words. Light reflected off the metallic surfaces and scattered panels, revealing new textures and subtle shifts in the environment, and both adjusted their movements in response, each step reinforcing the sense of collaboration and safety. The chambers seemed to breathe with them, responding to their careful navigation, and they advanced together, fully attuned to each other's presence, the rhythm of the floor, the play of light and shadow, and the ambient hum of distant mechanisms. Every motion was deliberate, every glance meaningful, and in the silence between steps, Zyra sensed the human attention to detail, the care and observation, and the quiet assurance that each movement was calculated to maintain balance and trust. As they reached the far end of the chamber, sunlight illuminated a wider, more stable area, and both paused briefly, sensing the subtle shift in terrain and the gentle change in light, a silent acknowledgement of progress, of partnership, and of the careful, patient understanding that had grown between them in the quiet, fractured space. The sunlight shifted as they reached the edge of the chamber, casting long shadows across the fractured floor that revealed subtle changes in elevation and loose panels. Zyra paused, her cyan eyes scanning the area ahead, noting the small gaps and uneven surfaces, while Ethan crouched slightly, his hand brushing a panel to steady it for the next step. The faint hum of distant machinery and the metallic tang in the air created a sensory map that guided each movement, and Ethan's precise adjustments, slight shifts of weight, and subtle gestures communicated where to place feet and hands without a word. Dust rose in tiny spirals as Zyra stepped forward, each motion measured, the balance of her body responding instinctively to the cues he provided. Light filtered through a high opening, illuminating textures of metal, concrete, and displaced debris that hinted at the safest path, and Ethan moved in tandem, guiding her with his presence rather than verbal instruction. A gentle gust stirred particles into soft eddies, creating fleeting patterns in the sunlight that required both to pause briefly, observe, and adjust to the shifting environment, their coordinated movements reinforcing the unspoken trust forming between them. Zyra inhaled the faint scent of ozone and scorched metal, synchronizing her pace with Ethan's, feeling the rhythm of his actions as an anchor in the fragile space. He extended a hand toward a slightly higher platform, signaling that it was safe to ascend, and she climbed carefully, relying on the logic and attention evident in every one of his gestures. The ambient hum, the shifting light, and the soft clatter of settling debris created a landscape of constant assessment, and both responded with acute awareness, moving deliberately and fluidly together. Zyra's eyes traced the angles of light across panels and rubble, anticipating how surfaces might react to weight, while Ethan mirrored her steps, creating a subtle, synchronized dance of caution and confidence. The chamber seemed alive with texture, movement, and sound, each element informing their choices, each step building the growing partnership rooted in observation and care. Dust motes glinted as they moved into a narrower corridor leading to an opening where sunlight promised a more stable area ahead, yet both remained alert, adjusting to slight shifts underfoot and subtle variations in the surfaces. Ethan's gestures were minimal but precise, guiding Zyra without breaking the flow of movement, and she responded with attentiveness, her body learning the unspoken language of human instinct and deliberate care. The rhythm of steps, the cadence of breathing, the interplay of light and shadow, and the tactile feedback from the terrain blended into a shared awareness, each aware of the other's presence, the environment, and the need to proceed with deliberate caution. They advanced together, side by side, the sense of trust, partnership, and mutual reliance reinforcing every movement as they navigated the fractured space, preparing for what awaited beyond the lighted threshold, knowing that careful observation and unspoken coordination were the keys to safe passage and continued connection. The sunlight poured through the high slits, illuminating the far end of the chamber where Zyra and Ethan paused to catch their breath. Zyra's cyan eyes reflected the shifting light, a mixture of wonder and cautious understanding in her gaze, as she studied the intricate patterns of shadows and textures around them. Ethan adjusted the loose panel beside him, creating a small, stable platform for her to step onto, his movements precise and deliberate, conveying reassurance without words. The air carried a faint metallic scent from damaged circuits mixed with the earthy tang of the stone floor, each inhalation sharpening their senses and heightening awareness. Dust rose in gentle spirals as Zyra moved forward, placing each foot carefully, guided by Ethan's subtle gestures and the rhythm of his presence. The faint hum of distant machinery resonated beneath their feet, a constant reminder of the fragile stability of the environment, and both attuned themselves to its pulse, adjusting their movements in perfect coordination. Light shifted through the slits, creating fleeting highlights on uneven surfaces that revealed safe footholds and potential hazards, and Ethan mirrored her adjustments, a silent signal of reassurance and partnership. Zyra extended a hand toward the platform, feeling the steady support in his subtle guidance, and took a careful step upward, her motions synchronized with his as they navigated the precarious terrain together. Small fragments of debris shifted underfoot, yet each movement was measured, deliberate, and in harmony with the flow of the chamber, reinforcing the growing trust between them. The play of light and shadow created a natural map, guiding their steps without verbal instruction, and both moved with acute awareness, each subtle gesture and glance communicating intention and attention. Ethan paused briefly, allowing Zyra to take the lead, his presence a stabilizing force, and she adjusted her stance in response, learning to anticipate the rhythm and timing of his actions. The air shimmered with dust particles caught in the light, swirling gently around them as they advanced, and every motion reinforced the unspoken bond formed through observation, awareness, and shared focus. Zyra's breathing slowed, matching the cadence of Ethan's, a quiet acknowledgement of their growing connection and mutual reliance. The far wall of the chamber revealed an exit bathed in brighter light, promising more stable ground ahead, yet both remained vigilant, scanning the textures, shadows, and slight shifts in the surface beneath their boots. Ethan's gestures, minimal yet precise, indicated safe paths, and Zyra followed with deliberate care, her trust in his guidance unwavering. The chamber seemed to breathe with their movements, every step, every tilt, and every pause reinforcing the unspoken dialogue of coordination and attention. As they neared the threshold, light reflecting off metallic fragments illuminated Zyra's armor, her eyes capturing the subtle nuances of their surroundings, and in that shared awareness, the realization emerged that their combined vigilance, trust, and quiet communication had transformed the space from uncertainty into navigable terrain, preparing them for whatever lay beyond with confidence, resilience, and a profound sense of partnership. The chamber opened into a broad expanse, sunlight flooding through tall slits in the walls and casting elongated patterns across the fractured floor. Zyra stepped forward cautiously, her cyan eyes absorbing every subtle shift in shadow and texture, while Ethan followed, a steady presence guiding each movement with precision and care. The faint hum of distant machinery vibrated through the floor, merging with the soft whisper of the wind moving through the broken panels, creating a rhythm that marked their passage. Ethan extended a hand toward a series of uneven platforms, tilting one slightly to form a stable path for Zyra, and she stepped carefully, feeling the assurance in his deliberate actions and trusting the silent communication of his expertise. Dust swirled in the beams of sunlight, reflecting tiny prisms that traced their movement across the chamber, and every step was deliberate, measured, and synchronized. Zyra's breathing slowed as she adjusted to the rhythm of his presence, learning to anticipate the subtle cues of weight, tilt, and balance that guided her safely forward. Light shifted across the walls, revealing previously hidden textures and gaps, and Ethan's gestures guided her around them, each motion precise and intentional, reinforcing the trust that had formed through their shared navigation of the environment. The scent of ozone from damaged circuits mixed with the earthy tang of stone and metal, heightening awareness with each inhale, and the two moved with coordinated attention, attuned to both the physical space and the rhythm of each other's presence. A gentle draft lifted particles of dust in spirals, catching the light and tracing their path as they moved toward a distant exit where brighter sunlight promised a safer, more open area. Zyra glanced at Ethan, her eyes reflecting acknowledgement, respect, and a quiet understanding that extended beyond words, and he returned the look with the subtle assurance of continued guidance and partnership. Each step was reinforced by observation and mutual awareness, every shift of weight a testament to their combined focus and adaptability. As they approached the threshold, sunlight illuminated a patch of metallic debris that shimmered softly, revealing the contours of the floor and signaling the last steps toward stability. They moved in near-perfect synchronization, a quiet dance of awareness, trust, and deliberate action, each aware of the other's presence and intent. The chamber seemed to settle around them, the air calm, particles of dust drifting slowly in the light, and in the silence, a shared recognition emerged of the journey they had completed together. Zyra exhaled slowly, feeling the human guidance that had carried them through uncertainty, and for the first time, the space felt less like a challenge and more like a landscape understood through observation, coordination, and trust. Sunlight reflected off her armor, glinting in patterns that mirrored the meticulous care with which they had moved, and in that reflection, both recognized the unspoken bond that had formed. The open exit beyond promised new horizons, yet in this moment, the quiet stillness of achievement and the awareness of partnership held them suspended, a pause that resonated with the culmination of careful steps, measured decisions, and mutual understanding, leaving the chamber echoing with the silent proof of resilience, trust, and humanity.